The 6'3" amateur champion at my gym started humiliating me in front of everyone, throwing my gear in the trash and using me as his practice dummy because I'm only 5 feet 5 inches with a sleeper build. When he trapped me in the cage and started slapping me around while grabbing the receptionist's wrist, I let him do whatever he wanted without fighting back. What nobody in that gym knew was that I'd made a promise to my therapist after the last time I lost control and put someone in the ICU. At 5 feet 5 inches with a sleeper build, I looked more like someone's little brother than a fighter. I'd watched dozens of first dates where the guy would point at me mid-conversation and say I could take him with one hand. So when I saw the 6'3" amateur champion heading toward where I was chatting with the receptionist at my MMA gym, I already knew how this would go. He planted both palms on the desk and leaned forward, creating this wall of muscle that made me invisible. "Kate, you coming to watch real training today?" His voice boomed over the gym music. "Got some guys from Jackson's coming in to spar." I shifted left to stay in the conversation. Bradley shifted with me, his hip checking mine just enough to push me back. I tried moving right, and he spread his stance wider, claiming more territory like he was defending a takedown. Kate glanced around his shoulder to find me. "Actually, Bradley, I was just..." Hold that thought. He turned slightly and his foot caught my water bottle. It toppled off the bench and exploded across my gym bag. Water soaked through the canvas and into my street clothes. "Shh, my bad." He said it loud enough for half the gym to hear, but never looked down. I dropped to a knee and started mopping up the mess with my towel. While I squeezed water out of my work shirt, Bradley picked up my training gloves from the bench. He held them between 2 fingers like something contaminated and sniffed them dramatically. His face scrunched up. "These are women's gloves, right?" A few guys on the mats looked over. Someone snickered. Kate's voice came out flat. "Bradley." He tossed my gloves in the trash can by the desk, maintaining eye contact the whole time. "Just trying to help. Can't build real power with gear like that." I stood up slowly and walked to the trash, pulled my gloves out without saying anything. "Come on, little man. Let me fix your technique before you hurt yourself." I straightened up and found half the lunch crowd watching. He grabbed my left arm and yanked it up, positioning my guard. His hands were rough and demanding, twisting my wrists, forcing my elbows in. "See, everything's wrong. Stance is too narrow." He kicked my feet apart hard enough to make me stumble. "Hands are too low." He shoved my fists up to my temples. "This is why YouTube training doesn't work." The audience grew. Phones came out. He turned me like a mannequin, explaining to everyone how I was basically doing everything backward. Each correction came with unnecessary force. A dig here, a joint lock there, all disguised as teaching. "All right, cage time. Can't have you throwing those pillow punches out here where someone might get hurt." He gripped my shoulder and steered me toward the octagon. "Kate, come watch. This is important." I let him guide me but kept my core loose. No resistance. Nothing he could use as an excuse to escalate. The cage door clanged shut behind us. Metal on metal. That sound that used to mean something different. Bradley demonstrated a basic arm drag that torqued my shoulder just past comfortable. "Feel that pressure? That's what happens when you don't know how to defend." He transitioned to a standing Kimura, cranking slowly. Any trained fighter would have countered by now. I tapped his leg. He held it 2 seconds longer than necessary. See how easy that was? Any real man would have defended that. He said it loud enough for Kate to hear through the fence. She'd stood up from her desk, concern creasing her forehead. He moved to collar ties, slapping the side of my head lightly to show openings. Each slap got harder. My ears rang, but I kept my hands down. The old instinct screamed to sprawl, to shoot, to do something. But I'd made promises. To myself, to therapists, to people who weren't here anymore. "Wake up!" Another slap. "Fight back!" He shot a lazy double leg, and I let him have it. We hit the mat, and he mounted immediately, his weight crushing my diaphragm. I bridged weakly, just enough to look like I was trying. He surfed it easily and settled heavier. "This is embarrassing." He turned to address the crowd through the fence. "This is what happens when people think they can learn from videos." Kate entered the cage. "Bradley, that's enough. He's not even fighting back." Exactly my point. He grabbed her wrist as she reached for his shoulder, pulling her closer. "This is what I'm trying to show you. You're hurting me." Her voice pitched higher. "Relax. I'm showing you something important." His grip tightened, and he yanked her forward. She stumbled, catching herself on the cage wall. "You little bitch! You think you can just walk away?" He spun around with murder in his eyes, daring me to fight back. My hands stayed at my sides while Bradley's grip on Kate's wrist tightened, and the whole gym went silent except for the sound of her trying to pull away. David Martinez burst through the cage door like he'd been shot from a cannon, his face red and veins popping on his neck as he grabbed Bradley's shoulder and yanked him backward hard enough that Bradley had to let go of Kate to catch his balance. David pointed at the cage door, and his voice came out low and dangerous, telling Bradley to get out of his gym right now before he called the cops. Bradley laughed and said something about David protecting his meal ticket, but David just pulled out his phone and started dialing, which finally got Bradley moving toward the exit while telling everyone this wasn't over. Kate rubbed her wrist and thanked David, who turned to check if I was okay, but I was already grabbing my gear and heading for the locker room because I needed to get out of there before the adrenaline dump hit, and my hands started shaking. The video was already uploading to Instagram by the time I reached my car, filmed from 3 different angles showing me getting ragdolled while doing nothing to defend myself, and my phone started buzzing with notifications before I even got the key in the ignition. I drove home on autopilot and spent the rest of the morning watching the view count climb while reading comments about how pathetic I looked, how I should find a new hobby, how guys like me gave martial arts a bad name. During my lunch break, I opened my laptop for the scheduled video therapy session with Dr. Smith, who'd been working with me for 2 years since the incident that changed everything. Her face filled the screen, and she leaned forward slightly, telling me she was proud of the restraint I showed, because 2 years ago, that situation would have ended very differently. I nodded and tried to explain how hard it was to just take it, to let him humiliate me in front of everyone, but she reminded me that protecting myself legally was more important than protecting my ego. We talked through the breathing exercises and visualization techniques while I picked at my sandwich, and she asked if I was still committed to the path we'd discussed, to proving I could control myself no matter what. I told her yes, even though every instinct in my body had screamed to sprawl when Bradley shot that takedown, to frame his face when he mounted, to buck and reverse position, and show everyone what 8 years of serious training looked like. She must have seen something in my expression, because she reminded me that one moment of losing control could undo all the progress we'd made, could put me right back where I started. The session ended with her telling me to journal about the experience, and we'd discuss it more next week. 2 days later, my alarm went off at 4:30 a.m. because I wanted to train before the morning crowd showed up. But when I walked into the gym at 5 a.m., Bradley was already there with 3 guys I recognized from his fight team. He looked up from wrapping his hands and gave me this big grin, waving like we were old friends, while his buddies snickered and elbowed each other. I headed straight for the heavy bags in the corner, keeping my head down and focusing on my warm-up, but I could feel them watching me the whole time. 20 minutes into my bag work, Bradley appeared next to me with his phone out, recording while he talked loud enough for the whole gym to hear about how I'd gone viral, and his girlfriend thought I was adorable like a puppy trying to fight. His buddies laughed from across the gym, and I kept working the bag, throwing basic combinations without any real power because I knew he was looking for content. He circled around to get a better angle and kept talking about how maybe I should try a cardio kickboxing class instead, something more my speed, and that's when Kate walked in for her early shift. She took one look at the situation and marched straight over, positioning herself between us while telling Bradley that David had specifically banned him from interacting with me. Bradley laughed and held his hands up in mock surrender, backing away while making whimpering sounds that his friends found hilarious. Kate stayed next to me until he rejoined his group on the mats, then squeezed my shoulder and told me not to let him get to me. I thanked her and went back to training, but couldn't focus because Bradley's partners kept taking photos and videos from across the gym, making sure I saw them doing it. Every time I moved to a new station, they'd adjust their position to keep me in frame, turning my workout into some kind of performance. One of them even walked past during my cool-down stretches and pretended to trip, spilling water near my stuff and apologizing with this fake concerned voice while filming my reaction. I packed up early and left through the back door, but not before hearing them making plans to come back same time tomorrow. A week later, the original video had over 2 million views, and the memes were everywhere, edited versions with sound effects making me look even more pathetic than the original. Someone added cartoon stars around my head when Bradley slapped me. Another version had a health bar above me that drained to 0, and the worst one dubbed baby crying sounds over my face. Something feels off about Bradley showing up at exactly 5 a.m. when our narrator specifically chose that time to avoid people. That's not a coincidence, is it? He brought 3 buddies to witness whatever he's planning, and Kate mentioning David's ban makes me wonder. My coworkers kept sharing them in our Slack channel with laughing emojis, not knowing I was the guy getting destroyed, and I had to pretend to find them funny too. The worst part was reading comments from people who trained, saying I was everything wrong with modern martial arts, that I probably paid for my belt online, that gyms needed to screen members better. During my morning workouts, I started recognizing people who'd seen the video, the way they'd do double takes and whisper to their training partners, and I knew they were all waiting to see if I'd come back after getting humiliated like that. That's when Ryan Cooper approached me one morning while I was working on my footwork in front of the mirrors. Ryan was a purple belt who trained early mornings like me, a smaller guy but technical, and he came up during my water break with this serious expression. He told me he'd seen what really happened, that Bradley had been bullying smaller guys for months and getting away with it because he brought in revenue from his amateur fights. He offered to train with me if I wanted, said we smaller guys needed to stick together, and something about the way he said it made me think he'd been through something similar. I accepted his offer cautiously because I didn't know if this was another setup, but Ryan seemed genuine as we moved to the mat area and started warming up. We flowed through some light drilling, and I kept everything basic, fundamental movements without any advanced techniques. But after about 10 minutes of rolling, Ryan pulled back with this confused look on his face. He said I was really good, like really good, and asked why I didn't defend myself against Bradley if I could move like that. I mumbled something about it being complicated and suggested we get back to training, but I could see his expression changing as he processed what he'd observed, the way I'd redirected his pressure without using any strength, how I'd maintained perfect base through every transition. We kept training, but he was studying me now, testing different attacks to see how I'd respond, and I had to consciously dial back my reactions to stay consistent with the image everyone had of me. 3 days later, I was loading groceries into my car after work when Bradley's lifted truck pulled into the parking spot next to mine, even though the lot was mostly empty. He climbed out with a protein shaker in his hand and made this exaggerated surprised face like he hadn't planned this, then walked around to my windshield while taking a long drink. He gestured at my car while talking about how his payment for his truck was probably more than my rent. Then the shaker slipped from his hand and exploded across my windshield in a thick chocolate mess that immediately started running down into the wiper wells. Bradley jumped back with theatrical shock, apologizing loudly while explaining he'd just had surgery on that hand and it was still weak, making sure to say it multiple times like he was establishing an alibi. The security camera on the light pole had been spray painted black the night before, something I noticed when I'd parked but didn't think much about until now, and Bradley made sure to position himself so his truck blocked any view from the store cameras. He offered to help clean it up, but was already walking away, calling back that I should probably wash that before it dried and ruined the seals, his voice carrying across the parking lot where other shoppers were loading their cars. Kate rushed out from the gym entrance where she'd been watching through the glass doors, and I could see the anger on her face as she looked at the mess dripping down my windshield. She started to say something about reporting it to David, but I just shook my head while using my gym towel to wipe away the worst of it, telling her Bradley would just deny everything and make it worse. Her hands clenched into fists, and she kicked at a piece of ice on the ground before heading back inside, and through the windows, I could see her gesturing angrily as she talked to someone at the front desk. I finished cleaning what I could and drove home with sticky residue still streaking the glass, thinking about how predictable this whole pattern was becoming. The next day, when I walked into the gym, Bradley was holding court near the weight racks, his voice carrying across the whole space as he told everyone how I'd begged him not to mess up my car, how I'd practically been crying in the parking lot. A few of the newer members laughed uncomfortably while the regulars just kept their heads down and focused on their workouts, nobody wanting to become his next target. David caught my eye from across the gym and motioned me over to his office, closing the door behind us once we were inside. He ran his hand through his hair and looked genuinely frustrated as he explained that his hands were tied because Bradley brought in 30% of their revenue through all the students he trained, but he promised he was watching the situation closely. I nodded and left without saying much, because what was there to say? We both knew nothing would change unless something forced it to. 2 weeks passed with the same routine of small harassments, always with witnesses around, always just deniable enough that Bradley could claim it was an accident or a joke. My laptop screen showed my therapist's concerned face as I described the pattern during our virtual session, how Bradley always made sure there were people watching but positioned himself so security cameras couldn't catch the worst of it. She leaned forward and started explaining about narcissistic behavior patterns, how people like Bradley needed an audience for their power plays and would keep escalating until they got the reaction they wanted. The session ended with her suggesting I document everything and consider finding a different gym, but we both knew I wouldn't do that because it would feel like letting him win. The next morning, Kate caught me alone by the water fountain, and her voice dropped to almost a whisper as she told me Bradley had been sexually harassing her for months, that it was getting worse, and yesterday he'd cornered her in the supply closet when she went to get more towels. My whole body went rigid, and I felt my weight shift to the balls of my feet, my hands automatically forming loose fists as years of training tried to override my self-control. Kate took a step back, and I saw fear flash across her face, not of Bradley, but of me, of what she'd just seen surface for a split second. I forced my shoulders to drop and my hands to relax, taking a slow breath before telling her she should document everything, write down dates and times, and exactly what happened. She nodded quickly and hurried away, and I stood there for a long moment trying to push down the familiar rage that wanted to solve this problem the way I used to solve problems. The next day, Ryan found me working the heavy bag and mentioned he'd been training with me regularly enough now to notice Bradley's patterns too, pulling out his phone to show me that he'd been recording some of the incidents just in case we ever needed proof. We went through his videos between rounds, and I felt a mix of gratitude and worry, knowing that having evidence was good, but also that Bradley wouldn't take kindly to being recorded if he found out. Our training sessions became a regular thing after that, but Bradley's crew started making it their mission to interrupt us, always accidentally of course. They'd crowd into our space claiming they needed that exact spot for their drills, kick over our water bottles while walking past, step on our gear that we'd set against the wall. Each time they'd offer fake apologies with smirks on their faces, waiting for us to react so they could escalate. Ryan and I just kept moving to different parts of the gym, never giving them the confrontation they wanted. During one particularly bad session where they'd interrupted us 4 times, Bradley decided to put on a show for everyone. He called one of his newer students into the center of the mat area and announced he was going to demonstrate what happened when someone didn't know how to properly defend themselves. His eyes locked on me the entire time. His hands moved with practiced precision as he showed a standing armbar, explaining to his audience how easy it would be to hyperextend the elbow, maybe even cause permanent damage if someone wasn't careful. He cranked his student's arm just a little too far, and the kid yelped, tapping frantically, but Bradley held it for an extra second while staring right at me. Then he transitioned to a neck crank, describing in detail how the vertebrae could separate if enough pressure was applied, how someone could end up paralyzed if the technique went too far. His student's face was turning red, but Bradley kept the pressure on, still watching me, waiting for me to step in. I kept hitting the heavy bag with measured strikes, each impact helping me stay grounded, stay in control. That night my phone buzzed with a text from Kate, and my jaw clenched hard enough to make my teeth ache as I read her message about being scared to come to work because Bradley had waited by her car for an hour after her shift ended. The next morning, I drove to the gym early to catch my workout before the lunch crowd and found a process server waiting by the entrance with a manila envelope, checking his phone against a photo of Bradley that must have been from his social media. I went inside and started warming up on the mats while the server paced outside, and 20 minutes later, Bradley's truck pulled into the lot with music blasting loud enough to rattle the windows. He strutted through the doors wearing his sponsor gear, and the server stepped forward, asking if he was Bradley Hawkins before handing him the envelope. Bradley ripped it open right there in the doorway, and his face went from confused to angry to amused as he read through the pages. Then he looked straight at me and laughed. This pussy actually thinks he can sue me? Bradley's protein shake accident was so perfectly staged, he might as well have left a director's chair in the parking lot. Poor guy's hand surgery must have been selective, only affects his grip when standing next to specific windshields in conveniently camera-free zones. My dad's golf buddy is a judge. He crumpled the papers and tossed them at the trash can by the door, missing by a foot, then pulled out his phone and started recording himself. I kept stretching but could hear him talking about fake victims and money grabs while pointing the camera at me between sets. Within an hour, his Instagram story had dozens of reposts calling me every name you could think of, and by that afternoon, the gym's Google reviews were flooded with 1-star ratings from accounts I'd never seen before, all claiming the place harbored scammers and liars. David called me into his office the next day with bags under his eyes and showed me his laptop screen where the review average had dropped from 4.8 to 2.1 stars overnight. He rubbed his temples and asked if maybe we we could work something out without lawyers, because he'd already had 3 members cancel their memberships, and 2 new signups had walked out after reading the reviews. I support you, but I'm losing members. I have kids to feed. His voice cracked on the last part, and I told him I'd think about it, but Jessica had already warned me that backing down now would only make things worse. 2 weeks passed with Bradley posting something new every day. Screenshots of my social media with circles drawn around random things he claimed proved I was lying. Old training videos where he'd pause and zoom in on my face to make memes. Even a badly edited compilation of me getting hit during sparring sessions with laugh track sound effects added. Jessica called to tell me she'd been contacted by 4 other people who wanted to file complaints about Bradley after seeing the lawsuit news, including a woman from his old gym in Colorado Springs who had police reports from 2 years ago. The case was getting stronger, but Bradley's harassment ramped up to match it, with anonymous accounts messaging my coworkers and family members, someone leaving printed screenshots of his posts under my windshield wipers at work, and 3 different pizza places showing up at my apartment with orders I never placed. I came out of work on a Thursday to find all 4 tires on my car slashed down to the rims with what looked like a box cutter based on the clean cuts. The security guard said he'd check the cameras, but called back an hour later to tell me the footage showed someone in a black hoodie and medical mask who'd kept their face turned away the whole time, and Bradley had been live streaming at a sports bar downtown with 8 friends when it happened, so there was no way to prove anything. Ryan found me sitting on the curb next to my car waiting for the tow truck and sat down beside me without saying anything for a while before offering to let me crash at his place. Bradley doesn't know where I live. You'll be safer. I accepted, because the thought of going back to my apartment where Bradley knew the address made my skin crawl. The next morning at work, my supervisor pulled me aside to mention that someone claiming to be a background investigator had called asking detailed questions about my employment history and whether I'd ever shown signs of mental instability or violence. She'd hung up when they couldn't provide proper credentials, but wanted me to know in case it was related to my situation. That same afternoon, Kate sent a group text to everyone at the gym saying she was quitting effective immediately and wouldn't be coming back to collect her things from behind the desk. David tried calling her, but she texted back that she'd already started packing to move back to her parents' house in Nebraska and didn't feel safe being anywhere Bradley might show up. The gym felt different without her at the front desk, quieter and tenser, like everyone was waiting for something bad to happen. Bradley's lawyer filed a countersuit the following week, claiming defamation and intentional interference with his fighting career, seeking damages for lost sponsorship opportunities and emotional distress that his filing said had caused him to develop anxiety and insomnia. Jessica laughed when she read it to me over the phone, but warned that even frivolous lawsuits cost money to defend against, and Bradley's family clearly had deep pockets to work with. I started training at 4 a.m. to avoid any chance of running into Bradley, using my key card to get in before the staff arrived, but one morning I opened my locker to find "liar" written across the inside door in permanent marker, along with a crude drawing I won't describe. The security office said the camera covering that section of lockers had been down for maintenance that week, so there was no footage of who'd done it, though we both knew there was only one person with both motive and access to make it happen. Jessica called me that afternoon while I was still cleaning marker residue off my locker door with rubbing alcohol and paper towels from the gym bathroom. She wanted to meet right away at her office downtown, so I drove straight there with my hands still smelling like chemicals and permanent marker. Her assistant waved me through to the conference room where Jessica had papers spread across the entire table and her laptop open showing property records and campaign finance reports. She pushed her glasses up and pointed at a highlighted section showing Bradley's father owned 3 major development companies in Denver and had donated over $200,000 to judicial campaigns in the past 5 years. The names of the judges matched ones who might hear our case, and Jessica explained how we'd need to file motions to get different judges assigned, but even that process went through clerks who knew where their bread was buttered. While she talked, I noticed Ryan texting me repeatedly, and when I finally checked my phone, there were 12 messages about his girlfriend Sarah being harassed at her job by guys who trained with Bradley. The texts got more frantic as I scrolled through them, with Ryan saying Sarah was threatening to leave him if he didn't stop helping with my case, and that Bradley's friends had shown up at her workplace 3 times that week. I texted back that I understood if he needed to step back, but he replied that he wasn't abandoning me, even though Sarah had already packed a bag and gone to stay with her sister. The stress of everything hit me hard that night and I couldn't sleep. Just kept replaying the parking lot attack over and over while my hands made fists under the blanket. My therapist, Dr. Johnson, had an emergency opening the next morning, so I drove to his office before dawn and sat in the parking lot until his receptionist unlocked the doors. In his office, I paced back and forth while telling him about the dreams where I hurt Bradley, using techniques I'd sworn I'd never use again, about waking up with my jaw clenched so tight my teeth ached, about the fear that one day I'd snap and become everything I'd worked to leave behind. Dr. Johnson took notes while I talked, and when I finally sat down, he leaned forward and reminded me that having violent thoughts didn't make me violent, that the fact I was seeking help showed how far I'd come from my past. 3 days later, I was loading groceries into my car at the King Soopers parking lot when Bradley's truck pulled up behind me, blocking my car in. He got out with 4 other guys I recognized from the gym, and they spread out in a half circle while I stood there holding a bag of frozen vegetables. Bradley stepped close enough that I could smell the protein shake on his breath and told me to drop the lawsuit or things would get worse, that I had no idea who I was messing with, that his father had connections everywhere. I shifted the grocery bag to my left hand and slipped my right hand into my pocket, where my phone was already recording, angling it slightly to catch his face while he continued threatening me. He must have noticed the movement because he suddenly lunged for my pocket, but I stepped back and to the side, letting his momentum them carry him past me. His foot caught on the curb, and he went down hard on one knee, while his friends stood there not sure whether to help him up or come after me. One of them actually laughed nervously, which made Bradley's face turn red as he pushed himself back up and brushed gravel off his pants. They left after that, but I sent the video to Jessica immediately, and she called within minutes, saying this was criminal intimidation and we could file additional charges. The walls felt like they were closing in on both of us as she explained how this escalation showed Bradley was getting desperate. A week later, we sat in the courthouse for our hearing with a judge who Jessica had confirmed wasn't one of the ones Bradley's father had donated to. Bradley's lawyer stood up and argued that I was a trained fighter concealing my skills to appear sympathetic to the court, that the whole thing was a setup to extort money from an upstanding family. Jessica countered by presenting Bradley's arrest records from 3 different counties showing a pattern of violence going back 6 years, plus witness statements from other gym members who'd seen him hurt people before. The judge reviewed everything, while Bradley sat there smirking at me from across the courtroom, until finally she ordered both parties to maintain 500 feet of distance pending trial. Bradley's smirk got bigger because we both knew there was no real way to enforce that order, and he'd find ways around it like he always did. David called me that evening to say he'd finally banned Bradley from Elite MMA, and that he should have done it months ago, that he was sorry for choosing membership fees over doing the right thing. Bradley's crew started training at Apex Fight Club across town, but they kept showing up places I went, always staying just far enough away to technically comply with the restraining order, while making sure I saw them watching me at the coffee shop, the grocery store, even outside my apartment building. Bradley's dad being golf buddies with a judge seems awfully convenient timing to mention right when legal papers get served. The way he crumpled those documents and immediately started filming makes me wonder if this whole reaction was planned before he even walked in the gym. 3 months later at the courthouse downtown, I sat in the witness waiting room checking my phone every few seconds while Jessica went over last-minute details with the prosecutor. Kate was testifying via video link from a secure location since Bradley had violated the restraining order twice trying to approach her, and when they brought the monitor into the courtroom, I could see her hands shaking even through the grainy connection. The prosecutor asked her to describe what happened that day at the gym, and her voice cracked as she talked about Bradley grabbing her wrist, yanking her around, calling her names I won't repeat here. Bradley sat at the defense table in a suit that didn't quite fit right, his jaw clenched so tight I could see the muscles jumping from across the room. When Kate described how scared she was, how he'd followed her to her car after I'd left, how he'd sent her dozens of messages threatening to ruin her life if she testified, Bradley suddenly exploded out of his chair and lunged at the TV screen. The bailiffs grabbed him before he got halfway, but not before he screamed something that made the jury recoil in their seats. They had to call a recess to calm everything down, and when we came back, Bradley was in shackles. The prosecutor called me next, and I walked to the stand, trying to keep my breathing steady. For the first time since this whole thing started, I let them see a glimpse of what I'd been hiding. Not the full truth, but enough. When the prosecutor asked about my training background, I straightened up and spoke clearly about my years of experience, my competition record, the techniques I knew but chose not to use that day. The jury leaned forward when I explained how I could have ended the confrontation in seconds, but made a conscious choice to protect myself without seriously hurting anyone. Bradley's lawyer tried to paint me as the real aggressor during cross-examination, suggesting I'd provoked the whole thing, that I was jealous of Bradley's success at the gym. I stayed calm and pulled out my phone, showing the screenshots Jessica had helped me organize, text messages from Bradley to other gym members calling me slurs, warning them not to train with me, videos other members had sent me of Bradley talking about teaching me a lesson, the security footage from the gym that showed him seeking me out, not the other way around, email threads where he tried to get David to ban me from the gym. The lawyer's questions got more desperate, but the evidence was overwhelming. During the lunch recess, I went to use the bathroom and found Bradley waiting by the sinks. The bailiff who was supposed to be watching him was nowhere in sight. Bradley's face was red and blotchy as he stepped closer. "You destroyed my life," he said. I looked him straight in the eye and kept my voice level. "Number you did that yourself." He raised his fist, but footsteps in the hallway made him think better of it. The jury only took 2 hours to deliberate. While we waited, I watched Bradley's few remaining supporters drift away one by one, making excuses about needing to get back to work, having somewhere else to be. His dad sat alone in the back row, staring at his hands. When the jury filed back in, everyone knew what was coming. The foreman stood up and read guilty on all counts: assault, criminal harassment, intimidation, witness tampering. Bradley's shock looked genuine, like he'd never actually believed the system would hold him accountable. His lawyer asked for immediate sentencing, but the judge scheduled it for 6 weeks out to allow for a pre-sentence investigation. Those 6 weeks passed in a blur of victim impact statements being prepared and meetings with the district attorney's office. When the sentencing hearing arrived, the courtroom was packed with Bradley's former victims. One by one, they stood up and told their stories. The woman from the coffee shop who'd needed therapy after he'd cornered her in the parking lot. The teenager from the gym whose parents had to transfer him to another school after Bradley started showing up at his basketball games. The older man who'd stopped training entirely after Bradley broke his ribs accidentally during sparring. The judge's face got harder with each statement. When she finally spoke, she acknowledged the pattern of predatory behavior spanning years, the escalation of violence, the complete lack of remorse Bradley had shown throughout the proceedings. She sentenced him to 18 months in state prison, 3 years of supervised probation after release, mandatory anger management classes, and restitution payments to all identified victims. Bradley would also be permanently banned from any gym or martial arts facility in the state. When it was my turn to speak, I stood up and looked at Bradley one last time. "I hope you get help," I said. "Real help. This doesn't have to define your future if you choose to change." He wouldn't meet my eyes. The bailiffs cuffed him and started leading him toward the door that led to the holding cells. His father, who was out on bail for his own charges related to threatening Jessica, never looked up from the floor as his son was walked past him. The courtroom emptied slowly, people hugging each other, some crying with relief. Jessica packed up her briefcase with a satisfied smile, already talking about the civil suits several victims were planning to file. Kate sent me a text saying thank you, that she could finally sleep without checking her locks 5 times. David shook my hand and said I was welcome back at the gym anytime, that they'd already replaced Bradley's photo on the wall of champions with a poster about respectful training practices. But as I walked out of the courthouse into the bright afternoon sun, I knew this wasn't really over. Jessica walked up behind me and put her hand on my shoulder for just a second before heading to her car, and I watched her drive away knowing she'd saved more lives than just mine in that courtroom. Kate came out next and wrapped her arms around me in this tight hug that lasted longer than I expected, and when she pulled back, her eyes were wet, but she was smiling, telling me she'd already applied to 3 different social work programs because she wanted to help other people who'd been through what she went through. I nodded and squeezed her hand before she got in her Uber, and then it was just me standing there on the courthouse steps, watching the city move around me like nothing had changed when everything had. Over the next few weeks, David's gym started filling up again, and not just with the old crowd, but new people who'd heard about what happened and wanted to train somewhere that didn't tolerate bullies. And David put up this whole new set of rules on the wall about respect and zero tolerance for harassment with his signature at the bottom in red ink. Ryan showed up at my apartment one morning with his gear bag, and we drove to the gym together without talking much, just the radio playing while we both processed everything that had happened. And when we got on the mats, it felt different, but good, like the air was cleaner somehow. We rolled for an hour straight, no words needed, just movement and breath, and the kind of trust you can only build when someone's had your back through the worst of it. 2 months passed before I finally made that appointment with the therapist Jessica had recommended, sitting in that beige office with the fake plants, while Dr. Williams asked me questions that made me think about why I couldn't fight back, even when every instinct told me to, and she said something about how my restraint had saved lives, including Bradley's, which sat heavy in my chest for days after. The letters started coming to my apartment about a week after that, mostly from other people who'd trained at gyms where Bradley had been, telling me their own stories about things he'd done that they'd never reported, thanking me for being the one who finally stood up, and I kept them all in this manila folder I labeled with a Sharpie because they reminded me why it mattered. Back at the gym, new people would sometimes recognize me from the news coverage and want to talk about it, but I'd just redirect them to the heavy bag or the technique they were working on, showing them how to throw a proper jab or escape from mount. Teaching them confidence came from knowing you could defend yourself, but choosing when to use it. My phone still had that video saved, the one that had gone viral and changed everything, but one night I sat on my couch and watched it one last time before hitting delete, watching it disappear from my gallery because it didn't define me anymore, and what mattered was who I chose to be when it counted. Sunday mornings became this routine where Ryan would show up with coffee, and we'd have the gym mostly to ourselves for the first hour. And one day, while we were warming up, he mentioned maybe we should start some kind of class for people who'd been bullied, teach them self-defense, but also when not to use it. And the more we talked about it, the more it made sense. 3 months after the trial, I found myself standing in the same cage where it all started, the morning sun coming through the windows and making patterns on the canvas, and I started shadowboxing slow and controlled, throwing combinations I'd thrown 1,000 times before, but feeling them differently now, feeling the choice in each movement, the decision to be strong without being destructive, to protect without becoming what I'd fought against. And as other people started filtering in for morning class, I kept moving, kept breathing, kept choosing who I wanted to be with every punch I didn't throw in anger. Thanks for hanging out while I tossed in my clever quips. Always a blast. Catch you next time, hopefully somewhere other than a courtroom. Like the video, it helps more than you think.